put together laws and we're going to try to pass them that make this community the way I want it to be. Right? So yeah, so who's going to second guess that with a straight face? I don't live in your community. I can't tell you what's best for your community. Right? The courts don't. You live there. So it's your job to make those decisions. And you have that incredibly high standard to do. You can do nearly anything you want. You know, you just have to make the ordinance to do it. Administrative decision, the standard is different. Okay? And that's critical. An administrative land use decision will be upheld only if it is supported by substantial evidence on the record. Okay? How's that different? Substantial evidence on the record. How's that different? How's that different than this? Reasonably debatable. You have to have evidence here. Here you just have to be able to debate it, you know, with a straight face. Even though you lose the debate, you still win. You know, you're not going to, your law's not going to get overturned. Here you actually have to have substantial evidence on the record. Okay? Take that home with you. What does that mean? Okay? If you are in, if you're a planning commission, if you're city council, you're trying to make a law, you're a planning commission, you're the land use authority, you're trying to make an administrative decision. Okay? Either of those things are happening, okay? What do you need to do? What do you need to do in order to make sure that your decision won't get tossed out by the courts?
Turn it over to our legal.
That's right. And what does he need to do? It's not, it's
Call you.
Call me. You need to make a good record. You need to make a good record. Okay? Your record needs to show that you met this standard, whichever one you're trying to meet. Okay? So if someone comes along and makes a big fuss, you can say, look, I got substantial evidence. Here's my evidence. Okay? It's substantial. Then you know you're going to get upheld if you made a good record. If you don't make a record, well, it says substantial evidence in the record. If you don't make a good record, you're out of luck. You know, there's a famous case out of Salt Lake City that I'm sure a lot of you have heard me talk about many times, where someone asked for a conditional use permit. It's an administrative decision. They asked for a conditional use permit, and it was approved. And it was challenged by the neighbors because the neighbors didn't like it. It happened to do with the restaurant and the way the restaurant handled their garbage. And it was approved. And the neighbors appealed it. And it went to the court, and the court overturned it. Why? Because there wasn't substantial evidence in the record. There may have been substantial evidence all day, and in fact there was, but they didn't put it in the record. And so the conditional use permit got overturned. Fortunately, they just went back and did it again, and this time they made a record. And it went up and it got approved. And they couldn't do anything about it at that point. So that's one of the reasons why it's important to know the difference. Is so that you make the right record. Right? You want to do that? You like getting overturned? Is that fun? It's not. Sir?
Is the record the recording that we make at each meeting, or what record are we talking about?
That's a great question, and the recording is part of the record, yes. Any correspondence is part of the record, okay? The best thing to do is make a decision and then write down that decision, right, and publish that. Okay, so here's our decision is X. We make our decision on this basis, bam, this decision is finalized at this date, signed by the mayor, whatever, and sent out, and that's the best way. But it's not the only way. The record can be recorded. I just wouldn't leave it to the recording. Because recordings can be too, you know, there's too much blah, blah, blah going on, and people are arguing about things and what exactly happened there. So that's helpful, that you're better off doing a final decision. Are you doing this just because it's being friendly? You want, hey, Brent, how are you? Yeah.
Or if the staff report has findings in it and conditions, and they adopt it, including the staff report that's part of it.
Absolutely, absolutely. She said if the staff report has findings, if the staff report makes a recommendation, you know, to the commission, stuff like that, that's all part of the record, and that's good. And that goes to your question back there about the relationship between the staff and the commission and stuff like that. Okay? You know, you don't have to have staff. There's no there's no legal requirement to be having staff, but if you have staff, you count yourself lucky and use them, put them to use, you know? Because, you know, they're supposed to be, you know, the professionals and you know, and they can help you build that record and help you make sure that you're meeting standards. What's another example of a administrative decision? Just throw one out there. Subdivisions, okay? Subdivisions are administrative decisions, exactly right. You don't have to change the law to do a subdivision, do you? You're just taking somebody's application and applying the law to it. It's an administrative decision. Very good.
With that being said, why do most cities and counties require a subdivision final approval by the legislative body?
That's a great question. What he asks is, with that being said, why do most cities and counties require their subdivision approval be done by the legislative body? I don't know that I would say most do, but a lot do. And I don't know. I don't know. Well,
Generally, it's because a lot of times in a subdivision, you're dedicating property to the local government or street or something.
Mhm.
So they accept it. They're the body that accept it.
okay.
It's not always the case, but a lot of times that's the
Did you hear that? Everybody hear that? He says he thinks that it's because most often when you're doing a subdivision, you're going to be dedicating streets or some other kind of property to, you know, maybe the sewer lines to or anything like that to the county, right? And it's the legislative body's job to accept that dedication. And that makes a lot of sense. Would you say more cities and counties do have the final approval for subdivisions by the legislative body
Yeah.
than not?
And I think it's for that reason. Though a lot of them don't understand that's the reason.
That makes a lot of sense, though. That's helpful. John?
Could you just sort of do a pro and con of the public hearing attached to administrative decisions? So for like a subdivision, you open up all the folks around there, conditional use, all the folks around there. It seems like we don't need to have those, but we seem to all do that.
You have just opened the door for what I plan to talk about for the entire rest of the time I stand up here. Okay? So that's exactly where we're going to go with this. I created this little chart in case any of you think it's helpful, okay? To highlight the differences between a legislative decision and an administrative decision. I know it's kind of small. You know, these are examples. Legislative decision creates law, applies law. We talked about that. Another reason why it's critically important to know the difference between a legislative decision and an administrative decision is because the appeal is different. Right? With a legislative decision, the appeal is straight to the district court. Okay? With the administrative decision, it's a local appeal. You know, it doesn't have to be, but it almost always is, and that's usually to your board of adjustment, right? Okay? And but you never local appeal legislative decisions. They always go straight to the district court. Okay? That's also important to know. But there's one thing, and John hit on this. This is what I want to spend the rest of the time on. And this is, I think, the most important difference between a legislative and administrative decision. It has to do with the public hearing process. And Will touched on this too. The most important difference. And here's your hint. You see what that is? Yeah, I took that up when we were counting the other day. You've heard the phrase public clamor, right? And it's critical to know the difference because it's critical to know what to do with public clamor. Have any of you never, ever, ever heard public clamor? Raise your hand if you've never heard public clamor. I'll give you $10. You're just lying. You're trying to get $10. Chad's all like, I need $10, man. You were the planner in the Frankenstein case? Oh, were you? Oh, I didn't know that. That's interesting. The role of public clamor. Okay. Here's the thing. What is clamor? And what's the difference between clamor and evidence? What's the difference between clamor and evidence?
Clamor is emotional.
Clamor's emotional. That's a good way, that is a big part of it. Clamor's emotional. What else? What else is the difference between clamor and evidence? You've heard clamor before. How do you know that whether it's clamor or whether it's evidence? It's usually uninformed. It's usually uninformed. Clamor is usually uninformed. What else? What's evidence? Facts. Facts are evidence. That's not all they are, but facts are evidence. Okay. Why do we need to know? Why do we need to know the difference between clamor and evidence? If we're making an administrative decision, okay, what are we supposed to listen to?
Facts.
Evidence. If we're making a legislative decision, what are we supposed to listen to? Clamor. Listen to clamor all you want. If you're having a zone change, man, let those folks line up. Tell them to put out their torches before they come into the building. I'll let them line up. I'll let them just scream and holler all they want and say, well, please, 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 won't someone please think of the children? And you're all like, yeah, I will think of the children. I'm denying this application because of the children. Right? Are you okay? If you've done that? Yeah? We're talking about a legislative decision. Yeah. So we're talking about a zone change. You're listening to clamor. Okay? Matter of fact, I don't know how you make a decision without clamoring. Okay? Because a legislative decision is a policy decision, remember. Okay? So you need to know what your community wants, right? And hopefully not everyone comes in there, completely off their cuckoo, But even if that is the case, I think it's reasonably debatable that it's best if I listen to this cuckoo and do what they think I should do. Right? And if you do that, you're okay. Right? And that's being kind of glib, but it's true. Yeah.
What if there is no clamor?
What if there is no clamor?
Let's say someone applies for a rezone and planning commission doesn't agree with it, but there's no clamor for them to back their opinion.
That's a great question. His question is, what if there is no clamor? What if there's an application for a rezone and no one comes? No one comes and says, no, I don't like this. But the planning commission, or the city council, or the county commission, they don't want this. Right? So what are they going to base their decision on? What are they going to base their decision on? Good question. Well, the answer is this, right? There was clamor at one point, okay? The clamor that got you elected, right? You were elected, you have a representative form of government right here, right? And you were elected for some reason.
Oh, exactly.
Which, if you're elected, that gives you the right to be the clamor yourself. Okay? So even if no one objects, matter of fact, even if 100 people come to planning commission and support a decision, they say yes, and you say no, okay? And you want to say no, even 100 people said yes, and you want to say no, who wins? Well, the courts always win, and the lawyers, right? You win. 100 people said yes, I said no. Right? Because I'm the elected official, it's my job to make that decision. And if it's reasonably debatable that I think that what I've done is in the best interest of the community, I'm good. So it's not even a question of voting. Okay? It's not even a question of population. It's a question of what the elected official wants. And if nobody comes, then you discuss it amongst yourselves. If it's reasonably debatable, you make the best decision, you make it and you're good. If 100 people come, if 1,000 people come. The old question is, how many people do I need to get to county commission meeting in order to get them to decide my way? How many people do I need to get there? Well, the answer is 3. If there's 5 people on the commission. Right? You get those 3 people there, and that's enough. Right? Yeah.
In the case of administrative action, when you've got a lot of public there, but you're not required to have a public hearing or have them speak,
Right.
You shouldn't even hear a public clamor in that
Right.
setting. How do you recommend you handle that? Because they obviously want to be heard.
Yeah. Fantastic question. Absolutely critical, okay? The question is an administrative question, when administrative decision, the people want to be heard, and they come with clamor, and how do you handle that, okay? A couple premises. First of all, it is illegal to consider public clamor in an administrative decision. It's illegal, okay? If you're making a decision based on public clamor, then, you know, you're going to lose that, because your standard, remember, for administrative decision is substantial evidence on the record. Clamor is not evidence of anything. So if you make a decision based on clamor, you've broken the law, okay? But here in America, thank Kevin, we all believe that we should have a voice. And all your citizens believe that they should have a voice, which means that all your citizens believe that not only should they have the opportunity to come and speak, but that you should listen to them, okay? And somehow that translates, though I don't know why, somehow that translates into the idea that in America the majority rules. Has that ever been the case in America? No. Good heavens, no. It hasn't. I mean, you know, we've had presidents who have been elected by less, you know, than the majority, right? So people think, hey man, if I have 100 people there saying yes and they have 10 people there saying no, we should win because the majority rules, right? It's not how it works, okay? If they come with clamor, what they say is, you know, if they come with evidence, that's different, okay? And this gets to the answer to your question. I think the critical thing that you need to take home today, from this part of the discussion, I think the critical thing you need to take home is, the most important thing you can do is you can train your planning commissioners to be able to discern the difference between clamor and evidence. Okay? Attorneys are going to have a big role in that. Staff are going to have a big role in that. But you need to be able to tell the difference between clamor and evidence. Because we have public hearings on administrative decisions all the time. I used to go around telling people not to do that. You're not required to do that under the law. You do not have to have any public hearings for administrative decisions. But people do, because people don't want, you know, pitchforks and torches. Right? So they go ahead, they have a public hearing on an administrative question. They have a conditional use application. The conditional use application is unpopular. Somebody wants a dog kennel, right? Somebody wants a dog kennel, and so other neighbors don't want barking dogs next to them, okay? Dog kennels, conditional use, they apply for conditional use, the people just come in droves, and they scream and they holler, and they scream and they holler, okay? They feel like they should have the right to. I don't tell people not to have those kind of hearings anymore for that reason, because people feel like they should have a right to scream and holler, okay? But you're just asking for trouble if your planning commissioners don't know how to tell clamor from evidence, right? You need to be able to know if the thing being said to me is evidence or clamor. How do you tell the difference? Any pros out there, any experts out there in telling the difference between clamor and evidence?
You should have your evidence in your ordinance, like on conditional use permits, like your findings, how you came to it.
I didn't hear all that, Shannon. What was that?
You should have your evidence in your ordinance, like, for example, conditional uses, you should
Yeah.
have that as part of your findings.
In the ordinance, you should have evidence. Well, what you should have is you should have standards in your ordinance, right? In your standards in your ordinance, when people come for a conditional use, right, you can apply those standards, okay? And then when people get up and talk about them, okay, you can listen to that and say, is that probative of that standard, right? Does that help advance that standard? Or is it just out there somewhere? So that's great. That's one way to tell. Yeah.
If you're required to give notice to the neighbors for maybe CUP, but you're saying you shouldn't have a public hearing, what's the point of the notice if you're not going to hear anything from that neighbor?
You give notice of a public meeting.
So it would just be so that they can talk.
So they know what's happening.
Well, that's only for a public hearing. Remember, there's a difference between a public meeting and a public hearing. Every meeting that you have as planning commissioners and as council, as the county commissioner and council, is public.
So are you saying it's only so that they know what's happening, but not necessarily to hear everything from the
10-4, okay? Unless in your ordinance you require a public hearing. and or unless the notice says public hearing. If the notice says public hearing, they get to speak. Most people don't know that difference, and the citizens don't know that difference. And so they get a thing that says public meeting and think they're going to come and speak. That doesn't mean they get to speak. Right? Also, with administrative decisions, you need to be careful about whether or not you even need notice, because you don't always need notice with every administrative decision. John?
That's actually sort of back to my original question, but people have that expectation they're going to get to speak if you're
Right.
being allowed. And I don't know if you have that much choice. I know you have a choice, but the politics part is you don't have much choice. I want to add one more thing to the gentleman's comment over here on the left, his question. You do have an opportunity to try and educate the citizens about administrative decisions. Having done the planning commission role for the last 4 or 5 years in Salt Lake County, every once in a while that'll work. It won't work all the time, but it's worth having that conversation about, you know, we need some reasons, some facts, not just I don't like it.
You know what? I found that to be really actually great, okay? Especially if you're having some kind of if you're having a public hearing, first of all, and we can talk in more detail about whether or not and when you have those. But if you're having a public hearing on an administrative decision where you can't listen to clamor, and the room is full because it's unpopular, I found that it's really helpful to right at the beginning say, okay, you folks, you need to understand, we cannot listen to clamor. We can listen to evidence. Here's how you know if it's evidence, okay? And go, okay? I found that in a lot of cases that causes half the group to not even run to the microphone. You'll still get a lot of people who clamor coming up to the microphone, but it helps.
Right, you said it's illegal. What's the ramifications on that as far as the law if you?
Listening to public clamor for administrative decision?
Yeah.
Great question. What's the ramifications of listening to public clamor for administrative decisions? Okay.
I'd say by listening to it, meaning that you pass, issues based on it, and decisions, you're open to huge liability.
That's right.
There's been some big damage awards.
That's right. First thing that's going to happen, that's exactly right. First thing that's going to happen is your decision is going to get overturned because the standard is substantial evidence on the record. And if you listen to the clamor, that if you make a decision based on the clamor, not evidence, your decision is going to get overturned. If it gets overturned, then wow, that's going to open the door to a lot of unhappiness. Okay, the developer, whoever was in favor of it or whoever had the opposite, feeling about it, that's gonna open the door to a lot of waste. A lot of having to run through the whole situation again, having to have people there again, all that kind of stuff. You need to remember that when you're making an administrative decision, your job is to apply the law. To apply the law. You are not working in policy. You are not. The question of what the law should do here is never part of an administrative decision. What should the law be is never part of that. You had your chance to do that when you were doing your legislative role. Okay? Now we have the law. Should the law change? Maybe so. Maybe I 100% agree that the law should change, but this is the law. Okay? So you need evidence to support that. Okay? Clamor is most of clamor is this shouldn't be, this shouldn't be, this shouldn't be. That's policy. Right? That's not how that's supposed to work.
I'm not horning on Brett.
Horn away.
This is, so what, people get a little more sophisticated now. Those who understand the difference now, they don't come in so much with opinion, but they come in to challenge your findings on your standards. So if your standard says, for example, you can't increase traffic on this roadway by more than X number of trips per day, and the planning commission going, yeah, we proved this and it meets all these conditions, and somebody would stand up and say, what's your evidence that they're not going to increase traffic here? Did you have a traffic study done? Is there something that shows that that standard is going to be met, that it's okay? And if the planning commission can't say, yes, we have evidence, here it is, we have this traffic study, or we know from an expert that testified about this or something, but if you can't say that, you're in trouble, potentially, because that may be grounds of delegation. And people are getting smarter about that, and honestly, that's their role. That's what they should do, is when they come to speak to that. What really gets hard is when the standards in your ordinance say things like, meets the character of the neighborhood. Or does not increase traffic, you know, well, everything increases traffic. So how does that become a standard? And that's where those kinds of things get tougher.
That's exactly right. And related to that, I'm following from it. People think also that it's a question of preponderance of the evidence, okay? So people will come to those meetings and say, what's your evidence? Well, here's my evidence. Well, I have better evidence. Here's my evidence. Your evidence says yes, my evidence says no. My evidence is by from a better expert, and it costs me a lot more money, and it's a lot thicker, and it's a lot more complete. Yours is junk, right? So I have better evidence, so you should decide in my favor. Okay? How does that fly? It doesn't work that way either. Okay? The standard, remember, is substantial evidence on the record. Okay? Preponderance of the evidence is better evidence over worse evidence. Okay? You have to decide for the better evidence, the preponderance of the evidence. Okay? But this is not this. Substantial evidence on the record means just substantial evidence. Which means that if I have substantial evidence and it's only that big, and somebody else comes in with that much evidence, I can still decide according to that, okay, and be upheld. As long as it's evidence, not clamor, and as long as it's substantial. And that's another thing that people don't understand. I get calls about that all the time. Right? Does that make sense? How do you tell evidence from clamor then? We'll wrap up with this. How do you tell evidence from clamor? What is evidence? Facts is the starting point, rather than opinion. That's the thing you hear more often in clamor, right? My opinion. Okay? So if somebody comes to the meeting and they stand up to the microphone and they say, this will harm the children of our community. Is that a fact? Is that evidence? Is that opinion? Is that clamor? What is it? This will harm the children of this community. What is it?
Emotion.
It's opinion, okay, until they give what?
Facts.
Facts to support it. Statistics. Right? An easier way to illustrate this is with the one that I hear more often. Okay? Someone comes up to the microphone and says, if you approve this conditional use, it will cause my property value to go down. Have you ever heard that one? Yeah? Somebody comes to the microphone and says that. If you're a planning commissioner and you're trying to, decide based on evidence, not clamor. And someone says that, what is it? This will cause my property value to go down. Is that a fact? Is that opinion? Is that evidence of anything? It's not evidence of anything. That's clamor. If you're basing your decision based on that, it's clamor. John?
What if the person's a real estate appraiser?
Well, what if the person is a real estate appraiser? That's a great question. What if the person is a real estate appraiser and says, I'm a real estate appraiser and this will cause my property value to go down?
What I would do is I would then maybe delay the decision and go get my own real estate agent.
That's right.
Give me an opinion. An unbiased real estate.
That's right. First of all, that guy is, if he's talking about his own property, then he's got a self-interest, right? Second of all, has he really produced any evidence? No, he's still producing opinion. And you know what? The opinion of a real estate appraisal is always opinion, okay? Because it's always just opinion. But, okay, the line between evidence and opinion always gets kind of gray, okay? So someone comes up and says, this will make my property value go down, and here is the appraisal that has been prepared by an independent appraiser. If you look on page 43, that independent professional MAI appraiser says that after this happens, my property value will go down $20,000.
Can you do
But one thing to remember, 99% of the ordinances, property value is not a standard.
That's right.
So it's not a standard that you make a decision by.
I see that in ordinances all the time now. I see ordinances that say, will not make property value go down. Okay?
Almost any ordinance could
change the value of a property. If your neighbor
That's right.
cleans up his yard, I mean,
That's
that
right.
can change the value of my property.
That's right.
I mean, anything to change it,
Government does things that changes people's value all the time.
yeah.
Government could do a rezone and cause somebody's value to go shooting way up. Does that mean they have to give you a whole bunch of money? You know, thank you for that great profit. You do stuff that causes property values to go down all the time. Right? That kind of thing happens all the time. We have already decided, and the courts have said, that that is one of the functions of living in an ordered society. Living in an ordered society makes that happen. We want to live in an ordered society, so we're just going to live with that. I don't like to look at me.
No, I was just thinking, property values are based on comparables.
Yeah.
So how could you ever put in an appraisal that if this happens, my property value will go down? There's no comparable for a future event.
Well, you're not giving creative appraisers enough credit. Because what they will actually do is first of all, they'll appraise your property the way it is now, and then they'll go find some other appraiser that's in the circumstances that your house is going to be. So another appraisal that has, in that zoning, that's on the corner, another property, and they'll appraise that one, and they'll say, see, this is worth way less than this one, and we'll make all adjustments, and I mean that, any appraisers in here?
It's not any other admitting.
Those guys, that's a bad, those guys, I don't know. Let me tell you. But it works the same, okay? Trying to tell the difference between clamor and evidence, it works the same, okay? People come up to the microphone all the time, and they will say things, and they will have something to back it up, okay? And you have to decide, is that evidence that I can base this on, or is it clamor? Okay? Like, I have an appraisal that's going to show this property value now. Or, like, this will increase crime in my community. That's clamor. My brother lives in the next community over, and this happened there, and they got robbed 3 times. Clamor or evidence? Tough. Hearsay? Very good. It's evidence. Okay, but is it good evidence? No, it's not good evidence. Okay? So not only do you need to know the difference between clamor and evidence, but you also need to know how to weigh evidence. How to tell good evidence. Okay? Good evidence is relevant. Relevant, that means it applies here. It really does apply here. Okay? It's credible. That means that, it comes from somebody who really knows. Okay? It's not hearsay, which means it's not what my brother says, Okay? And it's probative, which means it tends to prove something. Okay? A lot of people bring up evidence that proves nothing. Right? I think that this development is going to be bad for the children. And I can prove that by showing you 3 streets over where they put garbage out back and left it for too long, and now there's rats. And rats are dangerous for children. Okay, that's evidence. We can all go look at the rats. There's rats there. Okay? Is that good evidence? Is it probative? Does it prove anything? What it proves is you get rats if you don't bring in your garbage. Okay? But it doesn't prove that a commercial use is bad in this area. It's not probative. Relevant. What are we doing? Credible. Credible. Thank you. Probative. Okay? Yeah.
In the case of conditional use permits, can you use a lesser standard for evidence to put conditions on that use?
In the case of conditional use permits, can you use a lesser standard of evidence to put conditions
So for
on?
instance, there's rats there. Could you put a condition that says you will do such and such to mitigate rat
It's a
problem?
great question. First of all, and I'm going to lawyer on you here, okay? There is no lesser standard for evidence than substantial evidence on the record. There's no way to get worse than that, okay? But what happens with the conditional use permit is this, okay? You have several decisions to make with the conditional use permit, and each decision has to be supported by substantial evidence on the record, okay? So somebody comes in with a conditional use permit, okay? And you want to impose conditions, like, because you don't want rats, okay? First of all, you have to decide, are there detrimental effects to this condition? And that decision, are there detrimental effects, have to be supported by substantial evidence. Second, you have to decide, will this condition we are imposing mitigate the detrimental effect? That decision, will this condition we're imposing, has to be supported by substantial evidence on the record. Okay? Third, you have to decide whether or not that condition advances a standard that's in your ordinance. Always have to have a standard. Right? You cannot just make up conditions. Okay? So, if you're concerned about rats, you need to look through your ordinance and find out if there's something that a condition about rats is going to help. Okay? If you have an ordinance that says, if you have a standard that says something like the streets need to be cleaned every day or every week, or you're not allowed to have garbage out for too long, or some standard about cleanliness or something like that. Well, okay, we can impose a condition that meets that standard, right? Right? Because this particular use is going to have a detrimental effect. Why? Because this company that we're going to do the conditional use approval for makes delicious rat food. Okay? And so we want to make sure that we don't attract rats, so they're making rat food. We have a cleanliness ordinance here, so we think that rat food is going to attract rats. We have evidence to prove that. We think that we can impose a condition that will eliminate that. You have to take out your garbage twice a day. We have substantial evidence. That was kind of a long way to answer your very simple question, but I hope it kind of did. Anybody got any differing opinions to that? No? Yeah.
That standard, does it need to be within the CDC chapter itself, or somewhere within the county's land use code, or somewhere within the county's code overall?
There is nothing in the state law that requires it to be located anywhere in particular. Okay? It's highly recommended, in my opinion, that you put your conditional use standards in the conditional use code, because that's easier. Okay? But you can have it in the traffic code or wherever else, and if there's a standard there, you can apply that standard, and that's going to be fine. Okay? So, great question. All right, so are you going to be able to go home and help your folks tell the difference between clamor and evidence at this point? It's critical. You need to know the difference every time you make a decision. You need to know the standard that's going to happen, and then when the pitchforks and torches show up, you need to make sure you're making a decision based on the right thing. Okay? And that's tough. It's not something you're just going to go ahead and flip a button. Okay? But you need to always make sure that people are working on understanding that. So when people come up and they say things like, you're going, I'm not sure whether that was clamor or evidence or something. Well, was it fact-based? Was it opinion or fact? Is it probative, relevant, and what was the other one?
Credible.
Credible. Okay? And then you can weigh it, okay? And if you can collect enough substantial evidence, make that decision. Does that make sense? Everybody got it? Charlie?
Sorry, one last follow-up. I didn't want to derail with a little bit of what Will said about subdivision approvals, subdivision being administrative decisions. However, if there's dedication of rights of way, that's legislative. How does that work when you combine the two together?
Well, yeah. A lot of decisions that I find are some of both. Okay? Like, for example, I know a lot of places that say if you want to do such and such a thing, you always have to apply for a zone change and a subdivision. Okay? Our zone is agricultural. We're not opposed to development there. Okay? But you need a zone change and a subdivision. And really, we're not needing to decide the zone change until we decide if we like the subdivision. Okay? Well, you're making two separate decisions there whenever that happens. You're making the zone change decision and the subdivision decision. And you're making two types of decisions. Legislative decision for the zone change, administrative decision for the subdivision, and the two standards are going to apply. Now, does that mean that one party can't do both of those? No. Only the commission is allowed to do legislative decisions, but if they want to do both of those or whatever, I suppose that's fine. So, to go to your question, it's kind of a combined thing. Okay? Approving the subdivision, approving the layout, the size of the lots, the density, all that kind of stuff, that's a legislative decision. Accepting the roads or that's an administrative decision, accepting the roads is a legislative decision, okay?
So if they don't have the frontage to get those lots, which would be the administrative decision, they may not have enough for an approval for a subdivision.
That's right. That's right.
So subdivisions could be denied on legislative basis. Are they subject to approval?
They could be denied on a legislative basis, but honestly, I don't know that they can, that the layout and so forth, this is a great question, but I've never been asked it, and I'd like to have some of you guys' opinion. I don't know if they can deny the subdivision itself on a legislative basis. I think the only thing they could do is they could say, we refuse to accept the dedications.
So it may be private roads or something.
If that's what, if your ordinance doesn't allow private roads, you know? And there's no, there's no requirement that they would accept dedication. There's none. So, I mean, that's a pure legislative decision, but I don't think they can base that decision based on, we think this is too dense. That's an administrative decision, and you have put the density in your code. And if that application complies with that density ordinance, that's an administrative decision. That's a yes or no. Does it comply or does it not comply? Right? So that decision cannot be denied on that basis. But, I mean, I suppose.
Well, we won't be the first ones for it to be decided on. We're not going to get tested, so we'll figure something else out.
Well, now that Charlie's giving you all the idea, that's the kind of thing that's going to result in pretty quick change of legislation on that.
Oh, I'm sorry, I asked it.
Yeah, there you go. But yeah, I don't know any reason why you have to accept the roads. Great question.
Could you just explain a little bit about how accepting the roads is legislative versus administrative? You're not really setting up new law by accepting that road.
To me, it's a lot like an annexation. Okay? You kind of are setting up new law in the same way that annexation sets up new law because it's discretionary and it changes the city. Okay? An annexation, you have a certain map, and to change that is a legislative act. Okay? And I would say that accepting a road would do the same thing. It would change the city. It would change the map because now you have a city public road.
I can see where the elected officials say, we haven't got the money to maintain any roads.
Yeah.
So we're not accepting it.
And again, I don't know anything in the law that requires the city to accept dedication. Yeah.
So if it's in your ordinance that you're going to accept the roads in the subdivision, does that change it from being legislative? By saying if you build roads to a certain standard, the county or the city will accept those roads. Does that have any effect on what it becomes, what it is that they're doing?
That's a fantastic question. My gut answer is, if it's in your ordinance, you have to do it, right? It's in the ordinance to accept, okay? But I do know that if we said in an ordinance that you have to accept an annexation, that ordinance would be deemed illegal.
So you have to maintain the road up to your standard before you accept it?
Yeah.
It can't be built to your standard with curb and gutter, whatever. We have some in our area that we can accept because there's no curb and gutter that are required.
Sure. Yeah, this is a good question. This is a law review article right here. So yeah, you can put conditions on acceptance as far as maintenance and the way that it's built. Make sure it's built up to your standards. Yeah.
You have to take it.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, it's a great question. One of you, do me a huge favor. Try denying a subdivision based on because we'll have answers quickly.
The only reason my question was stimulated because when you're trying to streamline the subdivision process, can you actually remove the council from that? If it's legislative, it sounds like the answer is no.
Well, no, because as Matt pointed out, a lot of places, and I've seen this, a lot of places